Hey everybody and welcome. This is the new SugarBytes groovebox app and it's called Dialekt. I'm Gavinski and in this video I'm going to showcase all the features of the app, walk you through all the important things you need to know to use it to create cool tracks. You can do everything in Dialekt by hand, or you can use the super powerful and flexible randomizer, or you can combine these approaches. Dialekt works standalone and as a plugin on Windows, Mac, iPad and iPhone. For this walkthrough, I'm using the iPad version loaded as an AUV3 plugin inside the host app, AUM. Dialekt's built around an 8-track sequencer. Every track is dedicated to a specific role. You've got 3 drum tracks, a sampler slicer track, 3 monophonic synth tracks, and a 4-voice chord synth, which can also do arpeggiation. One thing that makes Dialekt stand out is the step sequencer. Every step contains all the synth data for that sound. That means you can create complex sequences and change things. You move a step, all the settings for that sound will move with it. Another really cool thing about Dialekt is the Song Randomizer. So you can generate full songs in various genres by randomizing basically everything: steps, synth engines, parameter settings, chord progressions and more. But if you want, you've got full control. Go into the randomization filtering section and decide exactly what does and doesn't get randomized. In the settings, I have Dialekt set to disregard the BPM of the host app, so that the randomizer will use the BPM it thinks is most suitable, and presets will load at the BPM they were saved at. If you want to make sure that Dialekt runs at your host app's BPM, set this to external. So anyway, you can use Dialekt in a lot of different ways. You can use it just to have fun, have a nice little jam on your phone or iPad or whatever, then finish things off on your laptop if you want. You can use it to create entire songs or individual tracks, use it as a plugin, use it live inside the DAW of your choice. It has multi-out, by the way, so you can process different sounds on different channels with different external effects. Or, export stems from it to combine with the output of other plugins or hardware. Or just use it as an inspiration machine to get new ideas for your own made-from-scratch compositions using other apps. So the first part of this video will focus on getting a very general understanding of the app. It'll show you how fun and powerful Dialekt can be, show you some of the main features, and as we go on through this video, it'll be pretty long. I'll dive deeper as we go into the nitty-gritty of how things work. Use the YouTube timestamps if you want to navigate to a specific section of the video. I won't cover everything in the manual, by the way, but I'll cover all the most important stuff. Okay. So, let's first get an overview of the features you need to understand to get started quickly. I'll go over some of the main functions of various pages of the UI in brief and look at each page in more detail later. Let's start by loading a preset. Use the page selector or the buttons along the top to go to the song page. Tap on the preset name at the top and pick a preset. Now let's go to the pattern page. This shows a close-up view of 16 steps at a time for all 8 tracks. In Dialekt we call this a pattern. A pattern has up to 16 steps. We can adjust that number on the synth page individually for different tracks, so you can have polyrhythms if you want. And 4 patterns together make what in Dialekt is called a part. We can navigate patterns using the arrows at the top of the page, or jump between parts by tapping on the boxes at the bottom of the page. We have lots of controls along the top that I'll explain later. For now, I'll just mention you can create or delete steps by tapping on them. If you want to edit the sound of a specific step, long press on it. This will take you to the synth page, and there you can tweak parameters like pitch, filter, cutoff, envelope settings, and so on. At the top, we have some super important controls that select whether your edits will apply to just this step or to entire patterns, parts, or the whole song, or whether to record your live tweaking of various parameters. When you're editing synth parameters, always pay a lot of attention to what you've selected here. This is key to making sure that your tweaks have the effect you want them to have. Another thing to pay attention to is the pin at the top of various pages, which can be used to loop specific patterns or parts. It's incredibly useful. If you pin something, it'll loop, and then you can tweak it exactly the way you want. If you turn the pin off, you'll see it's no longer looping. Also pay attention to this eye. The eye is called the View Follow button. If it's off, even if the pin's off, the view will stay on the selected pattern, so you can edit a pattern while other patterns are played by the song sequencer. If the eye is on, the view will always show the pattern that's currently playing. As mentioned, when we copy a step by dragging it to a different position, the entire sound moves with it. You can also copy steps by dragging them out of the sequencer area to the left or the right. That'll copy it to the previous or the next pattern. And you can undo and redo by using these icons on the top right. So you can build your tracks by placing steps manually, deciding exactly what kind of synth engines and samples you want to use. Let's look at the sampler. There are tons of samples to choose from, and of course you can import your own. And you can record Dialect's output to resample into the app. Let's just try that now. You can also record mic input in the standalone versions of the iPad and iPhone apps only. Or you can just use the Song Randomizer. Let's just stop this track first. So, worth remembering, the main point of the randomizer is just to give you a starting point for making your own tracks. You know, instead of you having to go in and put in all the steps and everything by hand and think exactly, you know, what kind of synth you want and, you know, let's say you want Wavetable, and what Wavetable do you want exactly? You know, you can just go into the song section, or you can do it from the memory page as well, and just randomize something and maybe come up with something that sounds promising and then do your own thing with that. I'll let you hear first a few curated examples. So I saved some examples of the randomizer that I thought sounded better than average. So you see here I said Fusion slowed to 128 BPM. Because a lot of the time these ones come out kind of fast, but I like to, you know, it can really, you can get something, you don't like it that much, but you speed it up or slow it down, and it can suddenly become really cool. I feel this one has a lot of potential. I could definitely build something really nice out of that. And I like it already just the way it is. Really nice little laid back kind of slight sort of reggae groove. Okay, next. Another slowed down fusion track. I like fusion, that's one of my favorite genres, I think, in this. So the linear stuff is a little bit Latin. Okay, so let's try the actual randomizer. So let's choose pop and randomize. 2 examples of each. Okay, step. That's cool. like those hi-hats. Okay, next. Pretty good. Hip, okay, let's go. Nice. We're on a pretty lucky streak here. Linear. Another one. This is one of my favorite genres. Another. Okay, let's try volt. I like that chord progression. These volt ones are also some of my favorites, I think, often kind of funky. I dig that. Okay, fusion. Nice. So, you know, it's definitely some promising stuff there. And again, you've got all the different options. Like, let's say, for example, you know, I like the sound of this. Then just let's just turn all of this stuff off. And so we're only going to be randomizing the gates and the pitches and, you know, effects and so on. Or let's just turn these off as well. So we're just going to randomize the gates and the pitch. Let's try that. So we're keeping that vibe, you know, the sound of each track. So the filters are very, very powerful. Okay. So now we'll look at each of the pages in detail, starting with the pattern page. So remember, you can switch pages using the page selector on the top left, or just tapping the page names along the top. On iPhone, you've only got the selector option, by the way. So here's my empty pattern, and I've got it pinned so it'll keep looping while I work. And what I did was I ran the randomizer until I found a vibe I liked, and then just cleared all the steps, but didn't clear any of the synth data. So when I add steps back in now, they'll have all these cool little variations from what the randomizer created, and that just keeps things interesting and saves time. So I'm just going to sketch out the basic pattern here first, and we can tweak sounds later on the synth page if needed. Right, so very easy to build something up and sounds great. So just remember, tap to turn steps on or off, drag to move them around and their data moves with them. Long press on an active step, that'll jump to the synth settings for that particular step. And you can double tap on the track name to go to the synth page for that track. Then double tapping again will bring you back to the pattern page. So the pattern page is perfect for laying down your basic groove because you can see all the tracks and all the steps and all the tracks at once. So then you can move or copy steps between different tracks here, which you can't do on the synth page. And that can lead to some unexpected, sometimes very cool results. For example, if I drag this first chord step onto the third synth step, The parameters over on that chord page are just totally different, so it can bring in something very unexpected. So let's look at these controls on top. We already talked about the view selector, the pin and the follow buttons earlier. The rest are all about step editing. So the hand icon, turn this on when you want to copy steps instead of moving them. The pencil lets you draw steps in or erase them with swipes. The first dice with dots randomizes just this track's steps, but it ignores the rules for the genre selected on the song or memory pages, by the way. The X with dots next to it clears just this track. The big dice randomizes all the tracks in the pattern, and this one does follow genre rules. The big X clears the whole pattern, and of course we have the very handy undo and redo buttons. Note though that these are not really designed for live use. A lot of data gets loaded when you use these, so you might have some kind of jump in the sound. So that's the pattern page in a nutshell. And now let's jump back to the synth page. So here I've just soloed the bass track. We're on the synth page, and first, before we look at the synth engines and stuff, I'm going to look at a few things about step entry and editing on the synth page, as well as some of these top controls. So just to contrast with the pattern page, if you remember on the pattern page, when you tap once, that will make a step active. Tap once again to deactivate it. So synth page is a little bit different. So in the synth page, if I tap here, for example, it's not making anything active or deactivating it, it's just selecting it. So you can see here, all of these knobs and everything, sliders and whatever, these are all the parameters for this first step. If I tap here, now we're seeing all the values for the second step and the third step and so on, right? Now, if I want to actually make a step active or deactivate it, I have to double tap, not just a single tap. So that's the first thing to be aware of. Then I also want to look at the editing range again, even though we've talked about this before, because it's so crucial. So here we're on step. So let's choose a step, for example, this one here, and let me bring the decay down. And so do you hear how short that decay is there? But only that step has been changed, right? All of the others still have this longer decay. And we can see the decay if we go to live mode, right? When we're in live mode, we're seeing the values change to show whatever the values are for the step that is under the playhead at any given time, right? So live mode is really fun for just quickly dialing things in on the fly and just recording all the changes that you make. So let's just show that by doing something very simple. What I'm going to do is just slowly raise the filter cutoff from about the halfway mark up to fully open over the course of this pattern. So remember we've got this pattern looped, we got the pin active, right? So let's do that now. So I'm slowly raising the filter cutoff, and now you see that's just been recorded, right? So that's live mode, really cool, powerful, and fun. I'll bring a little bit of resonance in there as well, maybe. Now, if we click pattern instead, when we make changes, those changes will be applied to all the steps in this pattern. If I choose part, the changes will be applied to all of the steps in this part. So in this case, we're on part 2. If I choose song, they'll be written to all of the bass tracks steps in this song, right? Now, we need to understand the difference between absolute and relative. So let's jump back to the live page for a second. So remember that we've programmed it so that the filter is between about the halfway and the fully open point. So let's go to pattern and choose relative. And I could really just choose any step, but let's just take this last one, say. And so here now we're on pattern and relative, and I'm going to reduce the value of this. I'm going to reduce it by about 50%. And now let's go back to live view. And so you see, a minute ago before I changed that, what we had here were values between halfway open and fully open, and now we've got values between fully closed and halfway open. So what it's done is it has changed the values relatively. So when I pulled that one knob's value down by about 50%, it's now brought all of the knobs down by that value. So that's how relative mode works. If instead I go to absolute mode and I change this, then this here cutoff value, let's just make it fully open. So this has now been written to all of the steps in this pattern. And we can see that when we go to the live page, right? This filter cutoff is just staying static at that value. I bring this down, go back to live page, right? It's just static. So those are super important to understand. Now here on the dice, we can randomize the gates for this pattern, for the bass synth, or we can randomize the parameters. Then here we've got the eraser. So the eraser is useful if we, let's say we have a lot of steps that we kind of want to get rid of quickly, then just press the eraser and just swipe to delete them. Okay, so now we've covered that, let's go and start looking at the actual synth engines themselves. First, we'll look at the controls that are shared between all the different synth engines. So we won't look right now at this section because this section will change depending on the synth engine you've selected. So we'll look at the tune, filter, this modulation section, this amp and envelope section, this effects section, and this little sequencer section. Then later we'll move on to talk about some of the interesting things about some of the synth engines. So we can adjust the pitch of steps. Don't forget to set your editing range appropriately by dragging up and down here. We can set the glide here for notes, and we can adjust the depth of LFO modulation and envelope modulation. Now, we can play notes, by the way, using the keyboard here as well if we don't want to use the sequencer. I haven't pressed play here. Sequencer's not on. So we can play notes also with an external MIDI keyboard if you want. And if you press record here, you can record a pitch into the editing range. So here we've set step and we've got the step selected. And so if I just press, let's say, a C on my keyboard, you can see that's been recorded in there. So that's another way that we can input pitches for different steps. Now I'll just turn off record. So we can dial in the amount of LFO modulation of pitch. Now the actual rate and shape of the LFO is determined by the settings over here in this little modulation section. So we have various rates that we can choose and various waveform shapes. So for now I'll just go back to this triangle. So here we dial in the amount of envelope modulation. So if we give this a positive value, this is related to the sliders here in the modulation section. So with a positive value here, this attack phase will increase the pitch and the decay phase will make the pitch drop. So have a listen, it go up and then down. Now, of course, exactly how that sounds exactly will depend on your settings here. Also be careful that you've set the amp envelope in a way that you're actually going to hear the changes that you make here. So here we're going to get down and then up. Again, we'll come back to this section in the next part of the video. Here we've got our filter cutoff and resonance, and we can modulate the filter cutoff with the LFO, again adjust to taste, or with the envelope, and again play with the sliders to get things the way you like them. Double tap to reset to default. Now, the way the sliders work here is identical to the way they work in the amp envelope. So let's just explain it with the amp envelope. It's a little bit easier to grasp for anybody who's not clear about this. So this is not an ADSR envelope, right? And that also means, by the way, that if you are triggering from a keyboard, you just need to tap. You don't need to hold because there's no sustain phase, right? So here we set the maximum level. Here we set the pan. And then let's look at how these sliders work. Now the icons here give you a little bit of a clue. So going up in this direction, we've got this icon representing what it'll sound like. We go down this way, it's represented by this icon. So first I'm going to bring the decay down, and here, let's just leave the attack as that, and let's have a listen. We bring this up a little bit. So do you hear here, we've got a fade in, okay, before it reaches the level set here. So this is just your typical, fade in attack. But if instead we bring it down this way, listen what we get. So here we get a jump, okay? It jumps to this level immediately and then it holds it. So this is called a hold stage. So it'll hold it for, if we put it about here, it's going to be held for quite a short amount of time. Again, how long you press the key does not make any difference whatsoever. Everything is set here. If I bring this down here, it's going to hold it for longer. Okay? So going up here, we're getting the fade in. Bring it up here, it's going to be a very gradual fade in. And then down this side, abrupt jump. And same principle with decay. So let's just shorten this attack time here. And so here we're getting an abrupt ending. So here it's fading out. Increase the time of the fade out by moving this up. On this side, we're getting an abrupt ending. Increase the duration by moving the slider down. Here we dial in the drive amount, delay, and reverb. And remember that the delay and reverb are related to the settings in the delay and reverb section of the mixer page. So let's come back here. I'm going to unsolo this and we'll jump to the snare page. And let's just solo this. So here we've just got 4 snare hits and we'll look at some of the controls. So here, let's take a step. Let's take, for example, this step. And let me change the probability. So at the moment, all the steps are set to probability off. And that just means that they'll all play every time. Every time the playhead arrives here, it's going to play. Now, on this step, just on this step, we're going to adjust the probability to 2. And what this means is that one time it'll play, the next time it won't play, the next time it will play, right? So it'll alternate. So it'll be on, off, right? So if we put it up here, now we're going to get on, then off again, and then on, right? So you get the idea, hopefully. If we instead move up here, we have some random options. So here it's not just going to be predictable like it was in these settings. These are totally predictable. Here we get some randomness and we just have different values of how random it is depending on what we set here, 1, 2, 3, or 4. So let's just bring the probability off again, and let's look at roll. So if we have roll off, we're just getting 1 hit here. Now I'm going to change the editing range to pattern for this, so I'm going to make all of them roll. So if we bring this up, now each time we're getting 2 hits inside the space of what previously was 1 hit. Bring it up here, we're going to divide it into 3 hits. And here 4 hits. And here 8 hits. And then if we come to these ones, 3 with 2 dots after it, what this will do is it'll still divide that step into 3, but it won't trigger each of those hits. It'll only trigger the first 2, and then we'll have a little space. And similar principle here, it'll divide the step into 4, but it'll only trigger the first 2 hits, and then we get 2 hits of silence. Same principle. Divide it into 8, but only trigger the first 2. Let's bring roll down there. Now, remember that we can adjust the length of patterns. So here, bring this down. For example, now we've got a length of 6. So every time it plays the 6th step, it'll go back to the first step. And so remember that we can set this differently for different tracks. So we can have polyrhythms. And same with tempo. We can have every track on a different tempo. So you can get very complex stuff going with that if you want. All right, great. So now let's go on and look at some of the interesting synth engines. We'll start with the Chord track, right? And I'll crank the volume a bit so you can hear the synths louder. Didn't want to fatigue you, you know, with a long video with the sound too loud the whole way through. Now, there are lots of engines here, so I won't describe them all in detail, but you can find all the nerdy info in the user manual. And remember too, you can always use the timestamps for this video to jump around if you think you know something already. I also note that every track in the synth section has their own preset system. So here you can load and save your own presets. So first, the sync oscillator. So here we've got an analog sounding oscillator with pulse and saw options. And the pulse width modulation here, by the way, is linked to the LFO. Sync frequency is the frequency of a hidden oscillator that restarts the main oscillator's phase. Next, super oscillator. Again, a couple of choices of waveform. We've got pulse width and pulse width modulation, and spread increases the phase difference between the oscillators. Next, the 3D oscillator. So here we've got 3 oscillators forming a modulated sphere. It's kind of new synth technique. We got 2 modes for detune intensity, and feedback adds harmonics, and the ratio knobs adjust the frequency relations of the oscillators. Then we've got the resonator. So this is a delay-based resonator, and you can do string and flute sounds and use warp to adjust overtones, damp to adjust the brightness, and use the high-pass filter to remove low frequencies. Next, choir. So again, saw or pulse waveforms. These are fed through a vowel filter with some added noise. You can dial in 2 vowel sounds, and the modulation envelope in the modulation section can morph between these vowel sounds, and then use the formant control to change the quality of the sound. Next, B8. So this is an emulation of a Hammond organ, but it has just 8 drawbars rather than 9. The mode switch changes the speed of the Leslie speaker effect, And then we've got 3 knobs for the drawbars. It's important to understand these. So each of these knobs will pull up one register fully while gently pulling up the neighbouring registers. All these knobs are the same. So if a drawbar knob is at 0, it pulls up the lowest register fully. If it's at 100, that pulls the highest register up fully. So you can play around with the 3 knobs to dial things in exactly the way you want. Next, FM. So this is 2-operator FM synthesis. The first mode here modulates feedback, and the second modulates the FM amount. This envelope mod knob, this is the modulation amount, and that is related to the mod envelope over in the modulation section. So you need to have this envelope mod knob up if you're going to hear a difference between these 2 modes. The ratio knob, that just sets the frequency difference between the modulator and carrier oscillator, and amount is the FM intensity. You can use higher settings for a sharper timbre. Then we've got Wavetable. So there are loads of wavetables available, organized into different categories. The wave knob sets the playback position in the wavetable. Then this envelope knob can modulate that, and again it will use the mod envelope in the modulation section to do that. So play around with these knobs to dial things in the way you like them. The drone knob applies a small random amount to each wave cycle to bring in a bit of a noisy sound. And then finally here we've got a little rompler, and we've got loads of sampled sounds in there in various categories, and you can reduce the sample rate and the bit rate if you want. Now let's take a look at the SynthTracks engines. If you look at the options for the synth track, you can see they're all ones we've already covered for the chord track, except the Monster engine. Here, 2 sine oscillators are modulated with each other, and a 3rd oscillator gives the bass note. The 2 modes set the frequency of the modulation oscillator. FM amount sets the intensity of FM, and FM envelope sets the depth of modulation of the FM amount by the mod envelope from the mod section. Top octave sets the octave range of the carrier oscillator. So the bass synth has the Sync, Osc, Wavetable and Monster engines that we've already looked at in other sections. And then we have the Sine FM AM engine. So here we're using modulated sine oscillators. You can choose the FM mode for a cleaner sound, and AM is good for a more natural sound. And the mod depth sets the intensity of the AM or FM modulation, and mod F dials in the amount of modulation of the mod depth knob done by the mod envelope. And then if we want, we can bit crush it. The organic synth is good for more realistic bass sounds. That uses an exciter and a self-resonating bandpass filter with 2 operators plus a sine fold algorithm. Mode 1 can get more distorted, Mode 2 is good for a fuller sound, and we can reduce sample rate and bit rate. Talkie. This is really great for Daft Punk style stuff. We have a saw or pulse option. Filter is the bandpass and low pass cutoff frequency. Try setting it to about 20%, say. And then the envelope knob uses the mod envelope to modulate cutoff. Try that around 60%. And then dial in a bit of bit reduction, maybe about 20%. Sounds really great. So the multi-synth track. Now again, Some things have been covered in other sections already, so let's only look at what's new. Right, clap. So the loose knob here controls how tight the claps sound, and we can use noise to fatten things up, and variation makes things sound a little bit more varied. Then Resonator we've looked at before, but here we have the string mode and then another mode which we didn't have in the other version. So this surface mode, the drum cymbal, that's good for bongos, congas, toms and stuff like that. And we've discussed the warp, damp and HP knobs already. RM drum, this uses ring modulation. It's good for percussive sounds. Use a ring F to dial in the timbre, the ring mod frequency. Oscillator decay sets the length of the oscillator part of the sound. And remember, the amp envelope still controls the overall length of the sound. And noise F controls the low pass filter frequency of the noise part. So, the slicer track. This can play sample slices. Use slice to select which slice is played from the sample. Low cut cuts off low frequencies, and direction plays forwards or backwards. Click the waveform or the slice edit button to enter the slice editor. Here we've got some slice tools. Play or zoom. Tap this, then tap the waveform to play slices or drag up and down to zoom. Click again to reset. Tap delete and click a slice to delete it. Click the waveform, by the way, not the slice marker. Add. If you turn this on and tap the waveform, you add a slice point. Move. Tap this and drag left or right to move the slice point. Normalize will normalize the audio level of the selected sliced waveform. Then we got the sample browser, so click the name of the current sample to open the samples library dialog, or click import to load your own samples. Dialekt works with WAV, AIF and MP3 files, and samples can be up to 10 seconds long, and we can have up to 32 slices. Slice sensitivity. Drag here to re-slice the sample. Slice start. Here you use the start offset control to slice the sample from a later point with the slice again button. Input. So the iOS standalone versions, iPad or iPhone, will allow recording from mic or line in, shown by the mic icon. Other versions only allow the second option to resample from Dialekt's output. Record. Here we have three options. Auto. Here the record button arms the recording to start only when audio crosses a certain threshold. Momentary. Here recording lasts as long as the record button's pressed. Toggle. Here the recording will last as long as the record button's on, but it'll automatically toggle off when the 10-second limit's been reached, or just manually deactivate the record button. Okay, the cymbals track. Here we have Metal 1, 2 and 3. These are three different versions of analog sounding noise made from detuned pulse oscillators. Noise is a digital white noise source. We have the Rompler here as well, which we've looked at in other places. The cymbal knob allows us to mix in sawtooth waveforms, and morph envelope will use the mod envelope to add to the value on the cymbals knob. Okay, snare track. So we've talked about clap and ROM already. By the way, on drum tracks, you might be better if you're using ROM to stick to the drums options due to the way things are mapped. Organic. Okay, so here we've got a self-oscillating bandpass filter plus noise. And this can sound like analog drum machines like the 808. And oscillator to tune detunes the second oscillator. NS Dirt brings in some nice dirty noise. This gives us a stronger noise sound. Synthetic, okay, here we're using a triangle oscillator. Add P-drop for harder transients. Control the tuning of the second oscillator. And here's setting the decay for the oscillator part. Remember to set the overall decay over here. Ring mod snare. Okay, so here we have one oscillator doing ring mod on the other. Use this second option to change the mod oscillator to pulse for a harsher sound. This one's using triangle. Dial in the timbre with this. We've talked about the pitch drop knob and the oscillator decay knob. Okay, let's look at kick. So it's nice to drive the kick, but that suppresses some low frequencies, so we'll demo it without drive. So we got a couple of different organic options, synthetic and naturalistic. ROM we won't look at. P-drop adds a short pitch envelope to the kick punch. Transient dials in the frequency of the initial click sound. Sideband mixes in a second ring modded oscillator. Same controls in organic too, just a slightly different sound. Synthetic, so here this is based on sine oscillators and it's got an FM architecture and a bit crusher here. So here we set the modulation amount, FM modulation. Pay attention to the settings here to adjust that. Hear the frequency of the mod oscillator. And if we want, we can add some bit crushing. The naturalistic kick is a synthetic algorithm. It's based on the sound of a real kick drum. So the noise parameter controls the noise level, and color sets the low pass filtering of the noise. So if you don't raise this, you won't hear anything when you bring in the noise, right? So bring this up a bit. And here we're adding more oscillators tuned to the modal frequencies of a real kick drum. Okay, so now on to the memory page. So I think the memory page is one of the most interesting parts of Dialekt. It gives you a bird's eye view of your song, the patterns, the parts, and effects parts, and you can modify some aspects of these. So let's just look at the structure. So we have some track buttons here. We'll talk about those in a minute. Here we have cells for different patterns. So this cell is part 1, pattern 1. This is part 1, pattern 2, right? So it goes along horizontally like that. So these are the patterns for part 1. These are the patterns for part 2, and so on. So for example, I select this, then that means I've selected part 3, pattern 2. These cells here, this is part 1, this, for example, part 4, and these are the corresponding effects, right? And then here we have some different tools. So we also got some very important things along the top here. The range selector, edit type selector, and mode selector, as well as a copy button and the undo and redo things. So you can copy or swap elements between patterns, for example, or you can randomize things, delete them, and you can choose whether you're editing gate data, i.e. whether steps are active or not, or parameters, so the sound stuff, synth knobs and things. And you can also do song randomization on this page. So let's look at these track selectors first. So here we have these vertical buttons labeled chord, synth, bass, etc. So these are track selectors, and they only really come into play when range at the top is set to selected. So when range is set to selected, you choose one of these tracks to focus on and choose the pattern that you want to focus on. So this means now I'm focusing on part 1, pattern 1, chord track, right? And so we have a little line through that in the color of the track. So all of these little dots, like these pink dots, these are the steps for the chord track. Here, there are no steps for the synth track. Then we see here steps for the bass track, and so on, right? So this now has this pink color all along the top there. It's just to help us remember that we're in the selected mode and that we've got chord track selected. So now actions like dragging or dropping and so on, or randomizing, these will apply to the chord track, right? So let's do a few little things. So let me pin this. And so you see there, I have rotated that. Doesn't really sound all that great. Let's rotate it a bit more. That's kind of okay. So that action, that rotation action, was just being applied to the chord track. If I randomize here, it's just being applied to the chord track. Right? Now, another thing we can do is this. So here, chord is selected, and if I take this chord button and drag onto this synth button, before I do that, just observe, remember, here there are actually no synth, there's nothing on the synth track, no steps. So edit type here, by the way, I've got it set to gates and parameters. We'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. So we'll drag here, and now you can see that the stuff from the chord track has been copied onto the synth track. Okay, now when range is set to all, then you see all these buttons are lit up, and any actions will apply to all of the tracks. So for example, if I take this and let's change this to swap mode. I take this and drag it over here. Now they have been swapped, right? If instead I go to copy, for example, and I drag this over there, now that has been copied. This blank one has been copied onto there. They have not been swapped. It's been copied. Now this edit type parameter is super important to understand. So we choose whether we're working with gates, so note triggers, or parameters, sound triggers, or both. So this applies to drag and drop actions and randomization, rotation, and so on. So a small parameter icon will be shown if we have only parameters selected here when we try to do some kind of operation. Let me show you what I mean. So if I copy from here to here, did you see there was a little white knob, right? And you see that this doesn't look any different, right? But actually it is different potentially because the sound features, the synth knob settings and so on, have been copied over. But we're not seeing any difference because in these cells, the only thing that we see is the gate information, what steps are active on what tracks. So this is just to remind us, because when you're first learning this app, it's very easy to make mistakes with that, and you might think there's a bug, for example. Maybe you think, oh, I've copied this, it didn't do anything, it didn't change anything, there must be something wrong. So then if we have range set to selected and we're editing just parameters, when we perform an action, you can see that the color of the knob is different. It's now the color for the synth track, this sort of greenish yellow color. Right? Now, here I have gates and parameters and range. Let's just keep it like that. Range is set to selected. So I drag here. Let me choose a different one first. Let me choose the chord track. Drag here. And so now the gates and the sound information for the chord track has been copied over. If I choose range all here and I copy, then all the information for all the different tracks has been copied over. So yeah, so hopefully all of that is clear now. So again, just remember, these cells represent patterns. This cell represents this part. This cell represents that corresponding effects part. And the colored dots inside represent steps of different tracks. Now we can trigger patterns live by tapping on them. So the pin is really important here. If you want to be able to trigger patterns like this, you want to bypass the song mode, because the song mode has its own logic of how things should be ordered. So press the pin to bypass that. Now you can also trigger patterns using MIDI notes. So we can do that with the keyboard in Dialekt. Right? So here I'm triggering pattern 1, part 1, pattern 1, here part 1, pattern 2, and so on. So you can use an external keyboard as well, and that would be MIDI notes 0 to 31 that you would use. So I hope you can see now why this page is so useful. Because especially when you generate something with the randomizer, you might want to change things around, And so to do that, you're going to want to hear what things sound like. I might want to hear, does that sound good after this? Nah, not really. In fact, do I even like this? No, I don't really like this. I want to delete this and I want to just copy this in there instead, So it just helps you to make those kind of decisions. Makes it much easier to arrange a song to your taste. Now, over here, we have the part section, okay? And so we can perform similar actions, copying and swapping and so on by dragging and dropping. Now, normally, part in Dialekt will play 4 patterns, right? So the normal thing would be, it'll play pattern 1. For example, here I choose part 1, and it'll play 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And we can change that with the length selector. So you see here, now it's not deleting the patterns. The patterns are still there if you want to go back to them. But now if we are on the song page, for example, when it plays this part, it's going to play it back differently, right? So length 1 just means that it will only play pattern 1. and it'll just keep repeating pattern 1. So length 4, the normal way it would play the patterns would be 1, 2, 3, 4, right? If instead I set length 1, now it's just going to play 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, like that, right? If we set it to length 2, now it will play 1, 2, 1, 2. If we set it to 3, we got 1, 2, 3, 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, like that, right? Now the dice icon here triggers part or song randomization using the selected genre, right? So we experimented with how these different genres can sound earlier in the video. And if range at the top is set to all, then the whole song can be randomized because it's going to randomize all of the parts, right? So all of the parts, that basically means the song. If instead range is set to selected here, then here it will just randomize the part. So let's just experiment with that. So let me put range to selected, and let's say I choose a different genre. And let's listen to that. Now, let me change range to all there, by the way. So now we're getting the song being randomized. Now you might hear some clicks from time to time. That's not really designed to be used live, it's loading a lot of information. Although if you time your presses right, you might get lucky. So choose something else and I'll switch range to selected and I'll randomize this first part again. Right, so you can also use this to make like weird kind of monster mashes of different genres. So the genre will affect how patterns, chord progressions, instruments, and other parameters get randomized. And remember that this checkbox icon next to the genre opens the randomizer filter panel we looked at earlier in the video, where you decide what gets changed, and very specific for different tracks and whether synth parameters will be changed, for example, or gates or pitch and all this kind of stuff. And note, by the way, that part and song randomization, okay, using this will ignore the edit type parameter, the edit type selection. Is it just gates or just parameters or whatever? Instead, that will be set by the settings inside here. Okay, what else have we got? Let's look at the effects parts. So here we have our parts for the different effects. So this is the effects for part 1, effects for part 2, and so on. Then here we have some tools, and so we can randomize effects, we can delete effects, and when we randomize we have two different options, serial and parallel. So let's look at this serial and parallel. So if I choose serial, you can see here the way it's being randomized. We're not getting effects stacked on top of one another. But if I choose parallel, we can get stacked effects. So let's have a listen to that. Double tap here takes us through to the effects page, by the way. So just randomize parallel a few more times. And serial. Oh, I didn't change. I pressed it twice. Okay, serial. Okay, so you get the idea. So the link button connects effects parts to their corresponding song part. So if link is enabled when we copy or swap parts, their effects will also be copied or swapped. So let's say, for example, I choose swap here. Right? See those being swapped. Now another thing we can do is we can actually copy and paste parts between different presets, right? So to do that, you do this. Choose the part that you want to copy, then press this copy button, and then go to the song page and jump to, let's say, jump to this one here, let's say, and go to the memory page and choose the part where you want to paste it in, and then press paste, and that's then been pasted in here. Let me press the pin. Right? So this way we can get nice, you can take the best parts from different tracks that you like and then work with all the different settings and go in and adjust stuff to your liking. Really cool. Let's jump back to where we were there. Okay. Now, what else can we do? Undo and redo. And then there's a couple of navigation shortcuts I want to tell you about, because it really might not be very obvious at all. So you can double click a track button to open the corresponding synth page. You can double click a pattern cell to go to the pattern page for that pattern. You can double click a part to open the song page. And you can double click an FX cell to jump to the effects page as we saw earlier. Right, so now let's jump on and take a look at the song page. So on the song page, you can organize various aspects of your song structure and manage your presets. You can experiment with randomness and chord progressions. You can dial in mutes and other stuff. It's a super useful page. So load presets by tapping on the song name, clicking into these submenus or whatever, and just clicking on one to load it. You can also save your presets using the save button and then entering the name you want. At the top of the page, we've got a bunch of settings that are super important. So here, length. So this sets how many parts the song has. And this can be a minimum of 2 and a maximum of 16. And loop from depends where the loop begins after one full playback. So this is useful if you want an intro. So let's say you want an intro and then you want your song to just keep looping, but you don't want it to play the intro again. Then here you could set it to whichever part you want it to start from. Let's say you want part 1 as your intro and then you want it to not play that again, but instead to just loop from part 2, then set this to 2. And stop after controls when your song will stop. So you can have it never stopping, it'll just keep looping, or you can set it to length, so it'll respect the value here, or you can set a specific number of parts that you want it to play for. And last note, this is really useful. So if you think about how songs stop, usually a song will stop on the same note that it started on. So here it's basically letting you choose which parts, it says here last note, but it's going to be which part's first note the song should stop on. So let's just demo that briefly. So I'm going to set length to 2, loop from I'm going to set to off, stop after I'll just put that to length, and here last note we'll just leave that as part 1. And so now I'll press play, and what you'll find is it's going to play the first part and then the second part, and it will stop by jumping back to the first part, but just playing the first beat there. Let's have a listen. Okay, so that's how that works. Now I'll just put length back up to 16. Now at this part here, we have tap for tempo. If you're in the Standalone app, you can also drag in the Standalone app to adjust the tempo. But because here I've got it loaded in a host app, it's the host that's determining the tempo. So here we can set swing value to bring in a little bit of groove. So don't go too high with that, or it generally won't sound very good. And you might want no swing. And so humanize just adds a little bit of timing variation. Again, if you put this too high, it usually won't sound all that great. Usually better with just a bit. And you can set the root key, just drag to change that. And we have a choice of chromatic, major or minor scale. Song mode, so here you turn it on or off. So this has got to be on for it to activate the song sequencer and follow your arrangement. Turn it off if you just want to select and loop a part. So currently it's part 4 that's selected. If I click here, instead it's going to loop part 3. So the play button, by the way, so the behavior here when Dialekt is loaded inside a DAW will depend on your clock mode in settings. So if it's set to internal, then when you press play in Dialekt, it will start from the beginning of the song. And if it's set to external clock here, it'll be synced with the host app's position. So it will start wherever that happens to be. So generally, I quite like to keep it on internal personally. Then let's turn this on again, and we can do this lockstep thing. So lockstep will just lock a part. So here it's locked this part 2, and so now this song is just going to loop that part 2. So this can be very useful when we're dialing in mutes. So let's have a little look at mutes. So here I've muted a lot of stuff. Let me mute the chord, it's pretty noticeable. Right, so bringing in mutes can be useful, especially at the end, but the nice thing about having the pin is you can just have it looping and experiment with exactly what kind of mutes you like. So here, basically, if we press this, it just means we're muting the chord for the first pattern, but not for the second, not for the third, and we're muting it for the fourth, just like that. Okay, let's just take those mutes off. So you can dial these in very quickly, right? Because you can just drag along like that. I'll just turn those off for now. So you can swap parts directly here on the song page by dragging one part's cell onto another. So we've just swapped those there. It's not very noticeable because they look very similar, but this can be useful for reorganizing a track, though you might find the memory page in general more powerful for that. And do remember, if you turn song mode off as well, you can just pick a part and just loop it. Now, repeats. So this sets how many times each part should repeat before the song moves on to the next one. So this will directly affect the total length of the song. So for example, even if here we have length set at 16, if I decide that I want this to repeat, so it's going to play 2 times, it's going to play part 1 1 time, and then it'll play part 2 2 times. You can see here the length of the song has actually gone up to 17. Now let's look at the randomizer. So tap the dice icon, choose if you want to randomize a part or a song. Here we have our genres, and here we've got the filter. So remember, you don't have to randomize everything, right? You can be very selective by subtly toggling which parameters are randomized. You know, you can just randomize a few things if you want. And by the way, the difference here between synth and sound is that if you randomize synth, you're potentially changing the engine type and the source material, like wavetables and ROMs. And sound is for randomizing stuff like knobs and sliders. And one thing I love doing, actually, and I'll just demo this for you now, is to deselect the gate and pitch options, right? And then just press the dice and let's have a listen. So let's listen before we do that. Okay, so let's randomize that. So what that's going to do is it's just going to randomize the synth and the sound, but it's not going to change the gates and the pitches. But potentially these things will also be randomized. Right, but because we're keeping the gate and the pitch the same, it doesn't sound all that different. So this can be nice to play with. We could turn these off as well if we don't want it, randomizing those. And then another thing you can do is change the genre. So let's pick tough, for example. But we're still keeping the gate and pitches from here, and this stuff, that's not going to change. Right? And then we could, you know, do the opposite. So we could deselect the synth and the sound, so they won't be randomized. Only now, only gate and pitch will be randomized. Let's put in the global settings here. So you can see by not randomizing the synth and the sound, we're really keeping things sounding very much in the same ballpark. Let's bring these in again. So the randomizer is super fun, I think. Do remember with the randomizer, if you've got it loaded inside a DAW, you might want to adjust the tempo depending on the genre. Because some genres, like let's say step, for example, feel better faster, but other ones like hips are better at slower tempos. And you can take a look at the manual for more information about these genres. Let's talk for a minute about chord progressions. So right in here in the randomization filter, you've got settings for chord progressions, and there are 2 tracks, A and B, and you can switch between those in your arrangement. So each track holds up to 4 chords. You see them here, and these will be connected to your chosen root key and scale. And we have a few different modes here. So random, this will just let the randomizer generate progressions. Then manual, you can drag and edit these things yourself. And then here, scroll through the arrangements. library random, this will pull a progression from the internal library at random. So that'll change it even if you don't, press the random dice right now. And library manual, this will let you scroll through here so you can see there are 20 different options here, and you just scroll through those like this until you get one you want. You can do the same for B, and then you can scroll through various arrangements here. Then chord rate defines how often the progression changes, so that can be from 4 steps right up to once per part. And okay, so here let's just quickly look at that arrangement. So here we're getting the A part 4 times and then the B part 4 times. So there are a lot of different options in there that you can choose from. Now, I want to talk briefly about the chord edit button on the synth page. So if we go into synth and we go to chord, then we have this chord edit section in here. So here we have 8 different chord types that we can choose from when we're setting in chords into the chord track here. So for example, currently for this step, we've got it set so that it's this chord playing here. And here we can decide what exactly that will be. So let's just listen first of all. I'm going to bring in the AUM keyboard here. Okay, so we can audition what that sounds like. So let's see, this is a D here. So let's just play a D there and see what that's like. So I can change the flavor of that by choosing from these options here. Right? And I can choose here, so I can change this until I get something I like. And I can also just drag these around. But now remember, the notes will be quantized to the root note and the scale. So this is a very important thing to remember that you can do on the chord page. And don't forget as well, by the way, that you've got the cool arpeggiator there. With some different directions. Okay, now one thing you can do, I'll just mention this before we move on. So you can go into the chord presets section here on the settings page, and you can save. If you come up with a progression that you like, you can save it in here. Just click here and then press save, give it a name. You can also import in here, and then if there are presets in here, you can load them, right? Okay, great. So let's jump on to the mixer page. So here I've got a nice tough genre track that the randomizer come up with, and we'll look at the controls of the mixer. So the mixer allows you to control all the track levels. You can solo and mute, and you can adjust settings for delay, reverb, and compressor. The mixer controls have Midi learn, so super useful for live purposes. You can use your host automation system, or you can use the Midi learn built into Dialekt. So to do that, just long press on a fader or a button, and this control will pop up. Then tap Midi learn and just twiddle the knob or fader on your controller that you want to assign to that, and it'll be mapped. And then you can use this button to clear if you want. Now I have the track faders and the solo and mute buttons here mapped to my external controller. So super useful for live jamming. And one big advantage of this as well is that you can jump to another page, for example the effects page, and then you can do a little bit of soloing while playing with effects. So I highly recommend mapping these to an external controller if you have one. Also note that a double click on a track name, so let's take Slicer for example, double clicked on that and now it's opened up the Slicer synth page. So all these little shortcuts are pretty handy. Now on the master level, the white meters show the overall output level and the orange meters show the amount of gain reduction from the master compressor. So if I bring down the compressor amount here for example, you'll see at a certain point we're not getting any gain reduction there. Now, if you have several tracks soloed or muted at a time, you can use these unmute or unsolo buttons to unsolo or unmute with just one tap. Note also the mute buttons light up dimly like they're doing here when they're triggered by mutes in the song section. We talked about that in the last part of the video. So if you do a manual mute, that will be brighter than those muted looking ones. And remember the delay sends are controlled via the delay parameter on the synth page. So if you make changes to the delay settings here on the mixer page, you won't hear anything unless you've turned up some delay knobs on the synth pages. So let's just go to the synth page. I'm going to go to Snare and I want to just solo that snare. And let's turn up the delay here a bit. Let's go back to the mixer. And so the times here for the delay are quantized. You've got feedback here. And you've got high pass and low pass knobs to attenuate low and high frequencies. Let's just jump back to the synth page and bring down that delay amount and unsolo. Then the reverb, same. So let's see what's got reverb over here on the synth page. The snare has it, okay. What else? Let's just take the cymbals and let's just increase the reverb amount a bit. Go back to the mixer page. So size, so here we're changing the size of the virtual room. Tail is controlling the amount of feedback, changing how reflective the virtual walls sound. And again, we've got filters to shape that. Okay. Now the master compressor glues everything together and keeps the output below 0 decibels. So here we're setting the compression intensity and increasing the output level. And the time controls adjusting the release range. And that goes from 1/8 of a note to 1/2 a note. Okay, let's look at the effects section. It's super fun. Okay, so for the effects section, I'm going to use one of the factory presets. This Boy Boy one, I've slowed it down though quite a lot. I think it still sounds good at this speed. And I've just pinned it so that part 4 is looping. I've taken off any effects that were in there. So currently we've got no effects written in. So Dialekt effects section. This combines performance style effects, touch controls, right? We've got XY pads, faders, and buttons. So we got that, and we've got a sequencer-based effect system that can record your touches. And you can record effects or just play them. So for now, I'm going to just play them. Now, remember to turn off the eraser, by the way, after you use it. Otherwise, you won't be able to draw things in, and you'll be there drawing away and nothing's happening. You're like, what the hell? So let's look at these performance controls first. So here, an XY pad for delay. The speed is fixed at quarter triplets, by the way. And the vertical axis is for delay feedback. And the horizontal axis is for the filter cutoff. Stop is a little tape stop effect. Just slows the audio down gradually within the time of a quarter note. Then we got this lovely low pass filter. This never closes fully, so it won't mute the sound entirely. And then you got a reverb / high pass filter. High pass filter cutoffs on the vertical axis, and the reverb amount is on the horizontal axis. The phaser rate is on the vertical axis, and the horizontal axis shapes the tone. Then we've got a looper. So just repeats the audio signal at a given rate. You'll find you'll have to experiment. Whatever track it is that you've got going, whatever the input audio is, some speeds will work well, some won't. So figure that out before your live gig. Otherwise it'll just sound like crap if you choose the wrong one. The lo-fi pad has sample rate on the y-axis and bit crush on the x-axis. And the chorus is toggled off or on with a button. So below that we have the effects sequencer. This operates at a resolution of 16th notes, and an entire line represents one part of the song, i.e. 4 bars or 64 steps. So to create events here, you just draw into the sequencer, right? So there we're drawing stop events, here we're drawing the high pass reverb events, and so on. It's very easy. Erase using the eraser. Do remember to turn it off after if you want to draw stuff in again. Now, really important thing, when you're drawing in, drag, right? Drag vertically while drawing to define parameter values for effects. Right? Now, buttons like stop, for example, or like chorus, these have no parameter data, so dragging up and down on those won't make any difference because they're just faders, right? Oh, sorry, they're just buttons, yeah. And so things like low pass or the looper, these ones only have one parameter data because they're faders, right? They're not XY. And so you can tap the name of an effects part to select it, and that'll allow you to properly view its contents. You see, if I'm not clicked on looper, I don't actually see the parameter information there. So we can see that here, and we can edit it. I can go in here and edit this. Now, if you press record, you can capture your live performance with the XY pads directly into the sequencer here. So watch that, I'll record the delay in now. And you'll see it's overwriting what we had there before. So in the effects lanes, you can only draw X and Y at the same time. But if you're recording, you can draw in separate values for X and Y. So in general, you might prefer recording using the XY pads when possible. Another little tip, by the way, if you're recording effects using the XY pads, the faders and buttons and so on, if song mode is on and you haven't pinned the part, make sure you stop recording the effect early enough. Otherwise, you might record into the next pattern by accident. That's not an issue here. But the issue if you have a pattern looped is you might start recording over the start of the loop again. Beside the record button, by the way, we've got this copy button. So that will copy the selected part of the effect sequencer, and then we just use the paste button to paste it into another part. So I can click here, for example, and paste that in there. This pen +4, this will draw or delete 4 steps at a time if you have the eraser selected. Draw 4 steps at a time with a single tap, and drag in will allow you to add in multiples of 4. So it's just a way to do things very quickly. This pen with the randomizer, this will, pen with the dice, this will draw in random steps and parameter values. And by the way, you can have both of these pens active at the same time. And the eraser deletes events, but remember to deactivate the eraser to resume drawing. So again, that can be handy combined with this. Ah no, it doesn't actually work together. Okay, my bad. Let's get that. You can also just use the X. So you can clear this part or all parts. And random opens up a pop-up to randomize effects parts. So you can randomize for this part or for all parts. And as we saw over on the memory page, you can decide whether you want them parallel or serial. So just very quickly review that. Let's just do it for this part. So here we're getting serial, and here is parallel. Let's just do it for this part, right? So here we're getting stacked effects and generally just a bit crazier. And then we've got good old undo and redo. And then at the bottom of the screen, you can see all the effects parts. Now we've only got effects in 2 parts here at the moment. So these are very similar to song parts. When song mode's active, they're sequenced by the song sequencer, and you can drag and drop them to change their positions. And just click on an effects part, click on an effects part cell to select it for editing. Now another thing is effects parts respond to Midi notes 32 to 39. So you can use an external keyboard because you can't see the Dialekt keyboard when you're in this view. And so on my keyboard, this means that FX1 is triggered by the A flat note a couple of octaves down. I'll demo this for you in a minute, by the way. So you can have a part pinned like here, right? But we can still trigger different FX parts while the main audio part loops. And by the way, I find that if you do use the randomizer for effects, especially for things like the looper, where only certain time values sound good, depending on the material, then you may want to edit the random output. And so yeah, the FX sequencer that follows the songs, if the song mode is active, follow the song position, and if it's inactive, you can select effects parts manually. So I've changed the track here. We're also just keeping one part pinned to keep it looping. So let's have a listen to this. So I'm going to play around a little bit with randomizing here. So let's see what it comes up with. So let's try serial first. I'll just do this part. I'll do all parts, but we've still got it pinned on this part. We'll jump around to some of the other parts soon. Right, so serial, pretty tame. And we can just keep pressing this part until we get something we like. They're all sounding good though, right? Let's try parallel. Let's just do all parts. Didn't randomize this one. That sounded pretty good. Great. You know, I find most of them you can't really go wrong with. It's only really the looper that sometimes causes problems and needs a bit of editing. Now, let me talk about something useful here. So in the settings page, down here on the bottom row, there's a useful option to turn on individual effects clocks. And I'm going to demo that for you now. So if this is set to no, the effects sequencer is slaved to the song sequencer. If it's set to yes, when you trigger effects parts with MIDI notes, the effects will play as long as you hold the note. And I'll just show you the difference in behavior. What you'll find is that when the individual effects option is on, so when we choose yes, every time you press a key to trigger the effects, it will start from the beginning of that part. You'll see what I mean when I demo it. If individual effects is turned off, when you press a key, you'll trigger the effects, but depending on the song position, you might not start from the beginning. Let me show you. So we'll keep it on no to start with and just jump back to the effects page. Now, here, look here, I'm going to press to trigger 1. So look at this part. And so you see when I press the key, it's triggering 1, but the actual position that it's at in the sequence will be controlled by the transport. So if I instead turn that off in settings, turn it on, individual effects clock, turn that on. Now I come back and now I press that same key. So I just pressed it and you see it started from the beginning. Right? So it's up to you really which of those you prefer. So now I'm pressing the key for 2. So let's go back and change it to this no option. Play around a little bit. So I'm just pressing different keys to trigger different effects. I'll just press here so we can view it. So let's randomize this part. Looper was sounding good there. And so again, remember, once you've randomized something, you can still go in and just make sure you've turned off the eraser. And then you can go in and edit those yourself with your fingers. And same with these, right? You know, record button's on, you can just overwrite these. Brilliant. So hopefully that's pretty clear and you can see how fun the effects section can be. Now let's move on to the settings, where there's actually a few things like this option, for example, that are really useful to understand. So wow, folks, we're nearly at the end. Great to still have you here. So let's listen to a few tracks from Dialekt's factory presets in the background as we go through these settings. For this part, as this video has gotten pretty long, I'm going to skip through most of this quickly, but there are a few things that I'll demo for you because they're either super cool or super important. And if you make it to the very end of the video, there'll be a really nice outro track for you to listen to as well, by the way. Okay, so first, iOS settings. Here you can do things like turn iCloud Sync on and off. You can link to the manual and link to SugarBytes apps on the App Store. By the way, you get really generous, very generous free versions of those that you can try. And then you can decide if you want to upgrade to the full version. In the standalone version of Dialekt, you get a few more options here, and you can check more details about those on the manual if you need to. There are some settings to change your audio settings, some things for Midi settings. You can do things like enable or disable Ableton Link. Right? Now, back out here in the main settings, tap here to open the manual. It'll just bring you to the SugarBytes website. Then here, swing ARP, no or yes. So the ARP in the chord section, sometimes you want the ARP to follow the groove, right? So let's say you set some swing amount here. So sometimes you want it to follow the groove, but other times you might want it to just stay straight. So this lets you choose whether the ARP responds to swing or not. Then we have clock source, internal or external. We talked about this a few times through the video. It determines whether Dialekt runs from an internal or external clock. So if you set it to internal, patterns will always start from the beginning after you press play inside Dialekt, right? Even if your host transport is somewhere further on. But if you set if you set it to external, then it will follow your DAW's position. So when you press play, it might start in somewhere in the middle of one of Dialekt's songs. Now, multi-out, this is something I'm going to show you later after I go through these. It's a bit different how multi-out gets set up in this. So multi-out is very useful when you load Dialekt in a host app. It allows you to use basically one instance of the app but open in different channels, so you can apply different effects to, for example, the kick, the snare, the bass, and so on. So we'll look at that a little bit later in the video. How you do that will be different in different hosts. I'll show you how to do it in AUM. Now, individual effects clock. So we talked about this in the effects section of the video. Turn this on if you're triggering effects parts via MIDI notes and you want the effects part to always start from its start when the note is held. And if this is set to no, then the effects sequencer will follow the song sequencer timing. Program change. You can turn this on to ignore incoming MIDI program change messages if you want. CC assignments. So remember that you can set up MIDI learn. Earlier we looked at that in the mixer section. tap long press to open up Midi Learn. So here in settings, we have a little option. If we turn on isolate, then Midi Learn settings will remain unchanged when switching presets. But if you have isolate turned off, then you could have different CC assignments saved within each preset, and it would respect those. Probability count. So remember, probability on the synth pages, we can set probabilities for different steps, patterns, and so on, parts and whatever. So back in settings here, if you're repeating parts, right, like the song sequencer does, it makes sense to use parts to determine when a gate should trigger. But if you're repeating patterns, then you might prefer to count patterns for the probability counter. Master tune. Okay. I'm always really glad when apps have this. It's useful. So as you can see, it'll take you all the way down to 415 Hertz, up to 466. Double tap to reset to default. Now here, humanize pitch. This is pretty interesting. So this option can add pitch variations. And when you set it to not, there'll be no variation. If you set negative values, so that's just you drag down, it'll introduce subtle random pitch changes to every note, emulating the character of aged analog gear. Now, if you give it a positive value, it will apply a fixed pitch offset to each of the 8 tracks, simulating the natural detuning you might hear in a live band, where everybody's just not quite in tune with the other musicians. Adaptive attack. So here we can turn it on for modulation and on or off for each modulation and amp. So what this does is it adjusts how the attack curve of the mod or amp envelope behaves. So if it's on, then the attack will start from the last output level. So if it's off, the attack will always start from 0. It will not pay any attention to what the last output level was. So maybe you could try this on for amp envelopes and off for mod envelopes. Do your own experimenting, see what you think works well. Audio and MIDI export. So the MIDI and audio data generated by Dialekt can be exported. And so just choose the length that you want for the MIDI or audio file you want to bounce, and then tap the symbol here, and you'll get the choice to export MIDI or export audio. Now, here, chord presets part, you can reset the chord memory to the factory chords, and you can save and load your own chord tables using the preset menu. So we talked about this while we were discussing chord edit as part of the song page section of this video, the chord edit in the chord synth track section. Now, the Song Randomizer will automatically overwrite chords, by the way, with the factory table. Now next, mute groups. So this will be very important to some people. So mute groups assign sounds to choke each other for tighter rhythm control. Use the left menu to select the source sound. Here you select the target sound, and here you choose whether the muting will be on or not. So a very common use case for this is to have a closed hi-hat, choke, and open hi-hat. But you can also use them creatively. Just experiment, try different things, see what works. Now here, MIDI channel out. So here we can toggle the MIDI output for each of the 8 synth engines. So the 8 different synth engines all send to their own MIDI channels. Kick sends to 1, snare sends to 2, and so on. And so here you can just toggle those on or off. Then here we have some advanced MIDI out settings. So here it lets you adjust the gate length and configure how drums are sent via MIDI. So gate length, this will define the length of outgoing MIDI notes. So if this is 100, then the length will be the full duration of attack and decay for that note set over there in the synth pages. Or you can bring it down all the way down to 10%. Could be something interesting to experiment with. Now here for drum tracks we have a couple of choices. So either we can send the drum tracks to 3 separate MIDI channels, right? Kick to channel 1, snare to channel 2, cymbal to channel 3. Or we click here, we can send the kick, snare and hi-hat, we send all of them to MIDI channel 1, but using specific MIDI notes, right? So for example, the kick will use C1, snare D1, but you can change these, right? And so this is very useful for triggering external drum modules. For example, SugarBytes drum computer. Now, the next thing, and I will demo this because it's really cool, is preset isolate. So let me first explain it to you. So when sound is enabled here, the current sound will not change when we load a new global preset, but the sequence can change. So that's a bit like having having one band, but they start playing a different song, but the instrumentation sounds the same. And then if we instead choose sequence, then now the sequence won't change when we change presets, but the sounds can. So that would be a bit like a slightly different band trying to play the same song. So let's just demo it quickly. So let's start with sound. So let me jump in and get different genre. So you see, all cymbals and everything, it all sounds the same basically. Now let's go in and try the other version. So here we're keeping the sequence that we had there, but we're changing the instrumentation. It's a really cool feature. One thing I want to quickly mention before we go and look at the multi-out. MIDI program change. If your mobile DAW or MIDI controller is able to send MIDI program change messages, you can call up the global presets of Dialekt, and you'll find more info about this at the back of the manual. Let's look now at that multi-out setup. So let's just look at how this is done in AUM. It will be different in different hosts. So here we've got an audio channel, and this is where we load an instrument. And I tap here, and I just load Dialekt. I just load it just as a normal instance, right? But then I go to a second second audio channel, and again tap here. But this time I don't go into this part. I instead choose multibus audio unit instances, and then I choose that, right? And now once you've done this, I find the easiest way to do it, we're going to want to have 10 channels, by the way, because we're going to have 8 for the synth tracks in Dialekt, right? kick, snare, cymbal, slicer, multi, bass, synth, and chord. By the way, make sure in here, turn on multi-out, right? So we're going to have those, but we're also going to have instances for the delay and reverb. So simplest way, click down here at the bottom of the channel and just press duplicate. And just keep doing that. Right? And it'll just keep duplicating those. And just do that until you've got 10 instances, right? And if I just solo these briefly, you'll hear what they are. So let me first go in and press play here. Let me choose a track first. Okay. So let me solo this. Right, so that's the kick. And so then here we have the snare. Right, and so on. So build up 10 of these and you'll have one for each of the synth tracks. And one for the reverb and delay. So this is just very useful because then you can open up different effects apps, you know, external delays or bit crushers or whatever, and apply those to different effects without having to open 10 instances of the app, which would really eat your CPU. I mean, here, my DSP is at 9%, but like I've got a bunch of heavy plugins opened on things like my mic chain. So those are taking some. So this is not intensive at all. Not intensive at all. Now, let's just get rid of those. And remember, if you want to use this normally again, turn multi-out off. Okay. Now, let me just pause that a second. And let me just choose something here for later. So we're finally at the end, everybody. Wow. You made it. This must be about 2 hours long now. Huge congratulations to you and to me. So listen, go grab the full or the trial version for desktop, iPad or iPhone and get stuck in. So as you have learned, if you've watched this vid, Dialekt can be super deep or it can be very simple. You know, maybe you just love smashing the randomizer, pick a genre and smash the randomizer, and then, you know, maybe just play about with the effects a little bit, right? Or maybe you like getting super deep, you know? Maybe you really painstakingly play around here to compose everything exactly the way you like it in the memory page. And maybe you go in and start with an init patch and build all of your synth tracks completely from scratch, or you just use the randomizers, right? It's all possible. So I'm sure you'll find a lot to enjoy and to inspire you if you get into this. Don't forget, by the way, to subscribe to the SugarBytes channel here on YouTube and smash the notification bell if you want to stay up to date with future releases. There's going to be a new video coming out relevant to Dialekt in a couple of days. It's going to be a big one, and I think you'll enjoy it. I won't say any more for now. But once again, I'm Gavinski, and thank you so much for watching. And I'll just pass on with big thanks from everybody in the SugarBytes team and everyone else who was involved in this project. It's been quite a long project, a lot of work put in by everybody, really. So I'll just leave you with an outro song, one of the factory presets. This one here, Tarifa Beach. Let's just put it up to its correct BPM and play that as a little outro. Thanks again for watching, everyone, and see you later. Have a great day.